welcome to all of you to this first of these Thursday meetings. Michael got the idea of meet an ethologist because ethologists are a dying species these days. So Michael, what are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, and just to add to that, I've noticed that dog trainers can get in endless discussions about dog behavior, but we rarely get an opportunity to ask an actual expert in dog behavior. So all those arguments can sometimes lead nowhere, just people fortifying their own positions without any reference to actual hard data. So some of you may know originally the topic was supposed to be fear aggression, and we'll definitely address that at some point, but we thought there's an even more interesting and fundamental concept of pacifying behavior that might be interesting to discuss.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Pacifying behavior is very important for all species. In our dogs, for instance, they are showing us pacifying behavior all the time, as we are as well. I mean, interacting with others is a series of behaviors with pacifying behaviors in between, because being social animals, we want to minimize conflicts and to maximize the possibility of cooperation. So yes, pacifying behavior, I agree with you, is definitely very important. But I would say that to talk about that, as always, we have to start with the definition. Would you agree on that?
Absolutely.
So I'm going to show you a definition that I think makes sense. This is my definition of pacifying behavior. It comes, by the way, from the Latin pacificare, which means, or pax, which means peace, and facere, which means facio, which means to make. And I would define it as is all behavior with the function of decreasing or suppressing an opponent's aggressive or dominant behavior, or restoring a state of tranquility, no conflict. As you see, I have highlighted the terms aggressive, dominant, and tranquility, aggressive and dominant behavior and tranquility, because these are terms that need to be defined by themselves. Of course, we don't need to define them right now. And if we define them now, we would need at least 3 hours more of a meeting than we have. But this is the definition that I think it's fair to describe this class of behaviors. So can you go with that one?
Yes, it all makes sense.
Okay. So this is pacifying behavior, basically. And there are different ways of classifying behavior. We can, as always, with definitions, and we can either make them very broad or very narrow. So we can either to include all behaviors with the function of diffusing social conflict, or we can restrict that to a particular range within the broader spectrum of conflict decreasing behavior. And I definitely prefer number two. And because there is an element of an universal element, they are understood by other species as well. You can see this Rottweiler here licking my face and ear, which is a typical canine pacifying behavior. And what I can do is I can accept that. And showing canine behavior, I would do that by turning my face away, closing my eyes and mouth, and maybe making some jumping noises.
I have a question about that. Does every time my dog licked me, is that always a pacifying behavior?
That's a very good question, because you don't know which slide I had prepared next, even if I know you and I know the kind of questions that you can ask me. Because look, pacifying behavior is closely related to friendly behavior, which friendly behavior includes greeting, and it's also related to insecure, submissive, and fearful behavior. Yes, go ahead, Michael.
Is there a licking that's a grooming behavior, and is grooming is grooming ever not friendly? It's just purely hygienic?
No, I would say that grooming can be many things. You know that in some species, grooming can even be a sign of dominant behavior, where the higher ranking individual forces the lower ranking to be groomed.
So you're saying sometimes when my dogs lick me, they're being friendly, and sometimes they're dominating me?
No, I don't think dogs use it towards humans that way. I definitely would say they can use towards one another. Yes, I've seen it several times where a more self-confident dog, typically an elder one, often the father or the mother of the puppies, that kind of forces the puppy to be quiet while she grooms the puppy. Can be licking the ears or licking the belly or something like that. That is actually in ethology. I know that we should not be talking about that because that's for a topic for another time. But that is in ethology what we call dominant behavior, which has nothing to do with the way that people these days talk about dominant behaviors. Mothers show dominant behavior towards their infants, and as they should, of course, because they know better. They cannot allow the youngsters just to fool around and maybe be killed, because if they get killed, then 50% of their genes go with them, you know, and that's a heavy price that you pay in nature. So please remember one thing. That's maybe good that you mentioned that, because then we can have that clear from from our very first meeting.
Yes.
For an ethologist, the terms that are used there, like dominant, submissive, fearful, aggressive behavior, have very little to do with the terms that people use them, that you see that normally dog owners and dog trainers using those terms. Very little. I cannot find, sometimes I cannot even find any resemblance at all. We use them to describe particular behaviors with particular functions. There is no morality behind. There is no being good or being bad behind it. So I'm glad that you mentioned it.
Thank you.
Another thing that is important to, I think, to note is that what is the difference between friendly behavior, insecure behavior, submissive behavior, fearful behavior? It's all a question of quantity. A little bit more of a behavior turns it from being friendly to being insecure, or to being submissive, or to being fearful. It's always a question of quantity. But it makes sense for us to classify behaviors in qualities as well, like boxes. And but we must remember that those boxes are not, definitely not fixed, so that we can say here is the threshold. I used to say behavior is like light. When the yellow turns into orange and orange turns into red, it's very much a question of culture as well. I know that the difference between yellow and orange, for instance, in Asia is a little bit different from the concept we have in Europe. I've experienced that several times when I say, well, this is yellow, and they tell me, no, this is orange, or the opposite. And the same happens with us. Something that I could call, for instance, insecure behavior, you would call it submissive behavior. But as long as we have definitions and we know that these thresholds are not set in stone, then there is no problem, because we can still understand one another. I can show you some pictures if you're interested. This is pacifying behavior in dogs. Licking on lips, it's a pacifying behavior, and it can also be, of course, that the dog is cleaning its nose. We also have to look behavior. We need to interpret behavior, but we need not over-interpret behavior. That's a big mistake.
Is there a good rule you can give to someone sitting at home with their dog, watching their dog and seeing him lick his lips? And how do I know when he's cleaning? How do I know when he's being submissive? How do I know when he's being pacifying? Is there any advice you can give to a pet owner who's now overanalyzing their dog, maybe?
It's a question of context. I was, while you were saying that, I was remembering Professor Lawrence, whom I've had the honor and pleasure of being a student. And he always, I remember him telling us very, very seriously, you have to look at behavior in a context. Behavior is nothing without context. Because you need to interpret. One thing is what the animal does, the other thing is how you perceive it. But the way you perceive it, first you have to take the sum of all behaviors, because one behavior never comes alone, okay? And then you have to see the context. Because one behavior can mean one thing in one context and another thing in another one. So look at the dog's context. Is there any reason why the dog should be pacifying anything or anyone? You say, no, I can't see anything. So probably it's just grooming or self-grooming, or, just feeling comfortable. But if you look at the picture in the middle, I call it semi-active submissive behavior in my book Dog Language, because the passive behavior is one where you just lie down, and the active is when you, for instance, number 3, it's an active pacifying behavior, the pawing. And in the middle, I would call it a semi-active or semi-passive, as you want. The Americans call semi, right, Michael?
Yeah.
In Europe, semi, and in US, semi.
Semi, yeah.
Active submissive behavior.
I have a question about the 2 pictures, the left and the center, because they're both doing the lick, which is similar to each other. But intuitively, when I look at these 2 dogs, I feel differently about them. Yes. I feel, because pacifying is about resolving conflict, but I feel like the dog on the left, and again, this is just an interpretation, so I want to know if I'm right or wrong. The dog on the left, I feel there's more risk of conflict than the dog on the right. The dog on the right, I feel no worry about, if I were approaching these dogs.
And if you look at one on the left, you can also see the eyes are getting smaller, the flat forehead, the ears maybe going a little bit backwards. So that dog shows that the conflict is maybe bigger than the one on the right. But you mean that the dog on the left, you feel it could be dangerous for you or something like that?
More dangerous than the puppy.
Oh, no, none of them is dangerous.
Okay.
The one on the left is not dangerous at all. I mean, you just he's just telling you that I feel very insecure in this situation. I really don't know what to do, and I would really appreciate some help.
Yes. Well, and another way to put it would be, if I had some very young children running around, I'd feel comfortable with them with the dog in the middle, but I wouldn't feel as comfortable with the dog on the left.
Yeah, well, again, I cannot tell you, because
okay.
It's the picture, and it's a picture, and
yes.
I don't know what the dog. We need to have this feedback loop. If I do something, how does the dog react? For instance, if I approach the dog with showing pacifying behavior, how does the dog react? Probably it will get up and come to me, lick my ear, and that means everything is good, no problem,
Okay.
I don't think the one on the left will in any way bring you any trouble. I mean, all dogs, as all humans as well, we can get into trouble, and we can cause trouble if we are put under pressure, right? Dogs are no different from us on that aspect at all. I mean, even you are the most peaceful person in the world, I guess, besides me, of course. And but we can be set in situations where we have to react, right?
Now, I have one more question, and if we need to table this for another time, then I'm sure we'll do many more of these conversations. But I'm curious about the middle picture again. In the last slide, you said that an appropriate response to pacifying behavior would be to turn your head away and make a champing song. It doesn't look like the other dog is doing that.
No, the other one is definitely showing that he's in control of the situation, wants to be in control of the situation. But I think that if we have the next picture, the other one would just sniff the belly of the little one and then just walk away. And then, of course, the little one would run after and again and again and again, insisting insisting that the other one would show that, oh, okay, I accept you, nothing happens, we are good friends. We see that with puppies and their parents, mainly their mothers, of course, because not very many puppies have fathers around. We see that very often, that the mother comes to them and they lie down, show submissive behavior, and then the mother licks them, walks away, and then they come again and lick her and lay down again in front of her, so that she does the same, and once again. Sometimes they even bite a little bit her ears or legs, just for her to show, okay, I am in control of my behavior, my emotions, and I'm not going to harm you in any way. Actually, in old times we read sometimes sentences like the dominant one pins the submissive to the ground. What I have seen, and that started in the beginning of the 80s with Eric Zeman, another of a colleague of mine and another student of Professor Lawrence. We were studying wolves at the time, And we saw that it was not the dominant one pinning the other to the ground. Actually, it was the submissive one forcing the dominant one to show that, okay, I can show you that I'm in control of this situation, and I do not harm you in any way. It was the other way around. And that was also in the 80s, right at the beginning of the 1980s. Simon was doing some studies in the south of Germany, bordering to the Czech Republic, now the Czech Republic. It was not Czech Republic at the time. And I was also doing some studies of wolves, first in Sweden and then in Longholm in Denmark. And we wrote to one another. There were no emails at the time. And we raised actually these doubts about the way of interpreting these kind of interactions in wolves. So it's interesting that it goes back to the beginning of the 80s, exactly. Simon published a book in 81, I think, and I published one a few years later. And it all started with the observations and then handwritten letters. Do you guys know what it is to write a letter by hand, using a real pen?
I can hardly write a check anymore.
Yeah. Let me show you one more, because one more picture, because just to show you that many species show pacifying displays also in their behavior repertoire. We can see cats, and you say cats, but cats are not social animals. Well, they are. They are not social as dogs are, but they are also social animals.
Which one is showing pacifying behavior, and how do you know? The one who's crouching?
The one to the left.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we have the chimps. Definitely the one. Which one is showing pacifying behavior?
The one looking away.
Yeah, well, actually, both are. Both are showing pacifying behavior. It's very interesting. The one looking away, the one to the left, you mean, right?
Yes.
Is showing the typical behavior that Jane Goodall described for the first time, which is just getting something in your mouth and chewing it. It's always pacifying. Chewing is always pacifying. And do you know where it comes from? I tell you where it comes from. It comes from it's neonatal behavior. In mammals, the first sounds they hear when they are with them, which is pleasant for them, it's the suckling. Those sounds follow them for the rest of their lives, and it gets a new orientation, as we call it in ethology, which means that a behavior starts with a function and then assumes another function later.
So when children suck their thumb, is that a pacifying behavior?
Yes, it is, absolutely. Pacifying for themselves. Because the interesting thing about pacifying behavior, I don't know if I have, I somewhere, I think it's this one here. Yeah, pacifying behavior also pacifies the pacifier, which is an important feature of this behavior. And here you see two species, dog and cat. And both speaking in their own language, but both also speaking in a kind of international language. So by displaying pacifying behavior, an insecure animal attempts to regain some security. You know, the homeostasis, the balance. By displaying a behavior it knows well and has previously served to reassure it. Interesting, isn't it?
It is.
Just one thing more I want to to show you here. You see, when I told you about the spectrum of behavior, I have the colors there to show you that when one behavior changes into another, it's as much as when does a color turns into another. And I have put a red circle around pacifying, insecure, and submissive behavior, because it's they all belong to the same type of behavior, to conflict decreasing. But sometimes it makes sense to call it insecure, other times pacifying, other times submissive.
Now, can an animal be both dominant and showing pacifying behavior? Because it seems to be on the submissive side of the spectrum.
Yeah, but you can. Dominant means self-confident. And of course, I don't have any picture of that here now, but when a submissive or insecure animal approaches a dominant or self-confident one, it's very often that the self-confident reassures the other one, the less self-confident, that, oh, everything is okay, don't worry. With the dogs, we see that very often, that the most self-confident puts the ears a little bit back, which reassures the other one that everything is okay, no worries. As our Aussie friends would say, no worries, mate. So I don't know if there are any questions.
Okay, so my question is about the pacifying behavior, pacifying the dog who's doing the behavior. I forget how you had it quoted. It pacifies the dog doing it. You know what I'm talking about?
No, not exactly. Can you explain that?
Yeah, it was the last slide where you said that the pacifying behavior pacifies, it helps to the homeostasis.
Oh, the pacifying behavior also pacifies the pacifier.
That's the one. That's the one. Okay, so what about an instance where a dog is being overly pacifying with another? You know, like just like continuously licking another dog to an obsessive degree. Would that be insecurity?
Yes, it is. It is definitely insecurity, but it can be too much, and it can be very annoying.
Yes.
It can be so annoying that I've seen that very often with puppies and their parents, because when I was doing these studies, I had fathers and mothers together with. I tried to have the whole pack together, so to study how they interacted with one another, and I saw very often some puppies, for some reason, that were very insecure, and they really pestered the father or the mother all the time to show them that, I'm here, and yes, I've seen you, everything is good, and then they try to walk. Sometimes they really try to escape from the puppies, like, leave me alone, I need time for myself, you know. And sometimes they had to be a bit unpleasant, really, to make a rah, go away, you know, like saying, leave me alone now. I already told you many times that everything is good. Go and, you know, take care of your own troubles by yourself. Well, you know, this is not very scientific to try to put words into it, but just take it as it is, just to give you an idea of what's going on.
So the dog that is displaying that behavior, the obsessively, the over pacifying, what are they trying to accomplish? What is their goal? Like, what would make them stop? Like, what's the end game of it? What are they going for?
What makes them stop? There are two things. First, what makes them stop, and I saw that clearly too with the mothers and fathers, is when the mother and father says to them, really, stop now, go away. You know, I don't want anyone here. I want to be for myself. You know, that makes them go away as well. And then, of course, but this is the symptom. Now we're removing the symptom. The behavior will disappear when the dog gets more self-confident, when it finds out that, oh yes, but I can manage without mom and dad being around me all the time. Some interestingly enough, also reacted like that when you took them away from their siblings. They were very good. We did tests with them where they have to solve problems together. For instance, labyrinth tests where they have to find, at the end of a long run, they have to find a treat, and they could go right, they could go left, etc. When they were in groups with siblings, they did extremely well. But if you put them alone, they got so stressed and so insecure that they couldn't do anything.
Huh.
That was one of the most amazing tests that we've done. And that depends on the age as well. There is a certain age where they are definitely not programmed to do anything alone. About 6-7 weeks of age, even 8, they are not really programmed to do things alone. That comes later.
Well, and I feel like I've seen that with people who have multi-dog households, maybe 4 or 5 dogs. Sometimes there's a dog that has never learned to cope on their own. And maybe a dog dies or a few dogs die, and they're just like, suddenly the dog seems afraid of everything, that they didn't notice it before. Yeah,
that's right. We had them, I remember from our cases of canine problem behavior, we had several with exactly with that problem that you described.
Is there anything people can do to help that dog?
Yeah, well, turn it more independent. You know, that is one of the problems that owners cause themselves. They inflict those problems on themselves and their dogs as well. Because unfortunately, many dog owners, I hope I don't get too unpopular saying this either. They are very insecure persons, you know, and they need the dog kind of to give them the security that they miss, you know. So they are not only projecting their insecurities on the dogs, but they are also enhancing them. and creating them. That is a serious problem.
Can I pursue that topic a little further?
Yes,
with
please.
Because I've also noticed another thing where a dog will show this incessant, annoying, pacifying behavior. But what happens in the end is they chase the other animal off of a resource like a bone or a toy or some food, and then they gain access to the resource. Have you ever seen that?
I'm not sure I know what you're talking about. Can you please?
Yeah, so imagine you have these two dogs, and one dog has a bone in his mouth or a tennis ball, right? And
One dog has a bone, yeah.
yeah, so and then the other dog comes up, and normally he would just guard the bone and growl and maybe snarl or anything like this. But the other dog comes and does all this pacifying behavior, licking and twisting and all this. And eventually the dog can't bring it upon himself to attack the dog who's taking his resource.
Yes.
And so he leaves and gives the other dog his bone.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. But that is a behavior that we see in other species as well. In chimpanzees, it's very known that they approach others also with kind of foolish behavior, infantile behavior, sometimes even sexual behavior, and pacifies the opponent. And the opponent, in the end, forgets everything about what was the source of the conflict, if there was any conflict or potential conflict, and goes away. It's a very good strategy. Nicholas, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Dr. Abrantes, a quick question. In regard to the pacifying behavior, are dogs, are they born, is that genetic? Do they just are born with those sort of like displays, or there's something that they learn through social interaction during the critical period, or just a dog, for example, that is taken away from the litter too soon, or it hasn't had enough social interactions with other dogs, and they usually end up lacking those sort of like social skills in a way. My question is, like, how do they learn that, like those pacifying behaviors? Is that something that is learned, or it comes, or is it in the genetic code?
Nicholas, as with everything, as with all kinds of behavior, there is no behavior without genetics, and there are almost no genetic traits that can come up without an influence of the environment. So you need both. With pacifying behavior in canines, there is definitely a genetic component, and there is a strong genetic component, because we have seen that late 70s and also beginning of 80s in Sweden. We actually, John and I, we were in Stora Sofielund, which was run by Anders Algren at the time, and he was doing also a behaviorist, and he was doing some studies on genetics of behavior at the time, and we saw definitely that some behaviors run into families more easily than others, and this shows that there was a genetic component. But there is no doubt either, because following up the study in Sweden, we were at the time in Denmark. We went back to Denmark and we made studies of siblings and separating them and putting in different groups with different environmental stimuli to see how they would develop. And we have no doubt either that behavior, social behavior in general, pacifying behavior is a social behavior. Social behavior in general and pacifying behavior depends very much on imprinting, which is one of the critical periods that you were referring to. Socialization, which is the next one, depends a lot on that too. So if you ask me, look at the dog and to tell you, a dog that doesn't show the right pacifying behavior, for instance, is that genetics or is that the environment? Sometimes it's very difficult to say, if not impossible to say. If you show me sibling, and especially half siblings, I will be able to tell you whether there is a genetic component or not. But if there is, let's say that all siblings and half siblings show in a high degree a propensity to show pacifying behavior, then I think it's fair to assume that it was caused by an environment, which is in this case training and
Conditioning.
whatever the owner subjected the animal to. Yeah.
Obrigado.
Very good
Thank
question, Nicholas. Very good question.
Just curious, can a dog that continually uses a pacifying behavior potentially become a fearful, aggressive dog at some point?
No, not at all. In 1 month, exactly in 1 month, we're going to discuss the very used term fear aggressive behavior. And to make you excited about that, I can tell you right now that there is no such thing as fear aggressive behavior. It does not exist at all. It's a terrible misinterpretation of us humans of the behavior of the animals. Just before I forget, because I always tend to forget these things, I want to show you one thing here. Going back to ethology.eu, and you can see the page of, this is the page of the Institute, and you go to articles by Roger Abrantes, you'll find one, which is article number 82. It's called Pacifying Behavior, Origin, Function, and Evolution. This is, it will tell you a bit more about the topic that we've been discussing today. There are over 100 articles there for free that you can read. And there are also videos, I don't remember how many videos, which are also for free. So
now, if you read a bunch of those articles, but you want more information, is there a course they could take?
Yeah. Okay, wait a minute, Michael. Good, you mentioned that. I have to find it here. There you go. It's this one. There is this course. It's called Agonistic Behavior, right, Michael?
Yes, not agnostic behavior.
No. Yeah, that is always the mistake that we make. It's called agonistic behavior. It comes from agon, which means struggle in Greek, and it reviews. It comprises, I think, 4 lessons or five lessons, and there is a final quiz for you to get your diploma, and it reviews basically everything that has to do with the conflict behavior. From pacifying behavior is a way of resolving, but I start by explaining aggressive behavior, fearful behavior, dominant behavior, submissive behavior, greeting, pacifying, everything that has to do with that. So maybe you would be interested in it.
I have a question. We were talking about dogs and learning behavior, and my bearded collie developed a situation where she would, when she was fearful of a situation, she would act aggressive. That makes sense?
She does not become aggressive because she's fearful. Okay, it's not that. It's the consequences of her behavior that might determine whether she will continue to be fearful or she will become aggressive. It's always the consequences of the behavior that are going to dictate, in a way, what's the next move. Okay.
What about?
But in this case, I tell you, it's very difficult for us to tell what it is without seeing it.
She reacts to other dogs being held back on a tight leash. The second it goes, she goes. Not necessarily now, but that's how it used to be. Or I wasn't walking her at a specific time when she was being pulled away from being able to meet other dogs.
Look, there are several elements here that may be the cause of that behavior. One of them, Nicholas mentioned it, is what happened during the critical periods. How was her imprinting and socialization? The other thing we also mentioned before is also later, how has been the training. I don't mean especially training like sitting and down and things like that, but I mean the environmental training. What has been the consequences of her behavior? I mean, look, if she, a dog that attacks other dogs, it's a dog that has had success with that. A dog that runs away from other dogs, it's because it had success with that. That's as simple, as easy as that.
Right.
Nothing comes just from, from above without a reason. Everything is a question of repeating a behavior with which you have been successful earlier in life. So if you want to change a behavior, you have to apply some consequences to that behavior that changes the behavior. If you want to increase it, you apply a reinforcer, of course, and if you want to decrease it, you apply an inhibitor. And there is another way of doing that as well, which is to find an alternative behavior. If you want to change a behavior, to find an alternative behavior which is more attractive than the previous behavior, which is very tough, by the way, very tough to do. But I'm sorry, we cannot really.
No, I'm just curious because I guess my question was, it's kind of like we see it. I hear what you're saying about her having success with that behavior, but when it's new people, new dogs, it turns into something not fun. But the ones that she knows already, they sort of like deal with her, and yes, so she's successful there. But they all sort of adapt into it in ways that we wouldn't know were okay because
Margot, sorry to interrupt you. I think that for me it really sounds like her socialization has not been optimal. It's not been.
Well, no, it wasn't when she was younger. No.
And that, of course, reflects upon the whole repertoire of behaviors, not only fearful behavior, but also maybe a lack of being able to communicate with others on a social basis, like greeting behavior, like common behavior.
I have a question, Professor. What is the difference between pacifying and calming signals?
Thank you very much for asking the question. Otherwise, I would forget to mention that there is basically no difference at all. It's just that someone once invented the term calming behavior because they thought that people wouldn't understand pacifying behavior.
Okay.
So, but it's the same. If you want to be professional, then you use the term pacifying behavior. That's the term. That's the
correct term. Okay.
Yeah, it is. You know, I have nothing against the calling things differently if they need to be called something different. I'm not afraid of that, and you know that.
Yeah.
Because I renamed punishers and punishments. I renamed them inhibition and inhibitors because I think it's a term that better describes what happens when we apply those aversive stimuli. What we want to is inhibit the behavior. It's not to punish the individual, right? Yes. But on the other side, if there is no reason to change a name like pacifying, then I don't think we should, because we only create confusion. You know, it's like the reward and reinforcement thing, you know. It's called a reinforcement and it's called a reinforcer. You know, there is no doubt about that. We should at least respect a little bit the people who thought these terms out and who coined them. And they were coined by the early behaviorists. Skinner writes a lot about it is a reinforcer, not a reward. So every time I hear people speaking about rewards, I get a little bit, strange. And of course, none of my students speaks about rewards. That's for sure. Right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Thank you.
You are welcome.
I have another question, but I think it's more appropriate for the next thing, next month.
What is the question? So Michael and I can.
It's about aggressive behavior and fear. It's been out there that people say that all the aggressive behavior is based on fear. Although,
yeah.
It's not a theme. I don't agree with that, but it's a theme that is discussed, and some people are saying that all type of aggression is based on fear. Can you?
Yes, we can, and we will. Okay. Next month we will debug that one. Debug and debunk, right?
Yeah, both of them, yeah.
Both of them, yeah. It's nonsense. I'm sorry to say, sometimes we have to call things by their right names. That's absolutely nonsense. It doesn't make sense at all. It's just a kind of trying to find an excuse for a behavior that people don't like. People don't like aggressive behavior, then they try to find excuses. Oh, it's also because he was fearful, I was fearful, something like that. Oh, sorry, yes, I killed my neighbor, but I was just afraid, I killed my wife, but I was so afraid of her that I had to kill her,
I think, and I'm sure this will be its own episode at one point, but it's tied into the same transition away from the word aggressive to the word reactive. It's, I think we're so afraid of the word aggressive, we just got to change it everywhere we can.
All behavior is reactive. Yeah.
And you know, reactive, by the way, the term reactive exists. Reactive aggressive behavior, it exists. And it was a term coined by psychologists to describe a specific type of aggressive behavior. And I think it's a pity that now aggressive behavior has disappeared. All dogs now, and even people, can people be aggressive, Michael?
Yeah.
Oh, they
Yeah,
can.
sort of.
Okay,
Yes,
people can be aggressive, they can be dominant, they can be submissive, but dogs are only reactive.
Now they're bullies.
Who? Dogs or people?
No, people. No, we're not allowed to be aggressive. Now everybody who's aggressive is called a bully.
Oh, okay, good. So we change the name. We will take it up from both from a ethology point of view and also from a philosophical point of view, whether it makes sense or not.
Can dogs learn to stop doing these pacifying behaviors if they are ignored by other dogs or people?
No, I don't think so at all, because it's a behavior that it is, or I'm sure they cannot, because, well, in specific situations, yes, of course, in specific situations, you can learn everything. You can also learn not to say hi to people. Well, now, for instance, they are teaching us not to greet one another, not even to smile to one another, because in some countries they force everybody to have a mask, you know. So I'm gonna actually draw a smile on mine, you know. I'm smiling, so people can see I'm smiling. So of course you can teach, you can learn everything, but if you are forced, but you really need to almost to use force. You need to use force, I would say that, to remove pacifying behavior or pacifying displays from the repertoire of a dog's behavior. Pacifying is so built in the animal. It's imprinted in almost, I would say, almost every gene of the dog, because it's a social animal. You know, you can prevent the dog from displaying pacifying behavior in some specific situations. That you can.
Okay, thank you.
I have a
You're
question.
welcome.
So then what's the difference between that and extinction?
Yes, that is extinction. Yeah, if you want to speak behaviorism, it depends. You know, everything depends. What language are we talking?
Yeah.
Now I'm an ethologist, and I've written about behaviorism as well, of course. And at one level, when we train dogs, we are all behaviorists. We all use behaviorism, even when we get the terms wrong, because most of the dog trainers that supposedly are behaviorists, they don't know the difference between a reinforcement and a reinforcer and a reward, and they don't know by no means they know what a punisher or an inhibitor is. But if we speak behaviorism, then we call it to extinguish the behavior. Yes.
Well, can I chime in here too? Because I think the idea, what you're saying, and this new idea about extinction is, you said earlier that the pacifying behavior also pacifies the pacifier. So yes. It's self-rewarding. It's not going to extinguish because there's an inbuilt reinforcement system.
You're right, except that it's self-reinforcing, not self-rewarding, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah, it's self-reinforcing. That is the strength of pacifying behavior. It is. Let me say it again. First, it pacifies the opponent and it pacifies the pacifier, and it is reinforcing for both of them. So it looks like the topic of today was a very lame topic, but it is not. It's a topic that cuts through the whole spectrum of canine behavior. And in other animals too. Now we have Jonelle. Where is Jonelle? Is Jonelle still around? She is, and Tilda. They are the horse specialists. Jonelle, can you say something about your experience with the pacifying behavior in horses?
Oh goodness.
Yes.
Well, it's there. It's there for sure.
Yeah, we saw it a lot. You remember when we were doing those horse studies and training and all that, and I was pointing out to you, look, there is pacifying behavior. If you ask a horse, what's the best thing you want to do? Just leave me alone. With some horses around, a good grass around, that's it. I don't need too much activity. You know, I like the attitude of horses, actually.
It's actually the opposite of what people want to do with the horses. So it's hard to teach people to leave their horse alone.
Yeah. What do you say, Tilda? Also one of our horse experts.
Yes.
Very short, yes? Or you want to say something more?
The nudging with the head on you is pacifying behavior.
Yeah, that's a pacifying behavior. Definitely.
It's also often misunderstood.
And also when you're riding, they also show you very often, you know, the ears going up and down, you know, like communicating with you. I'm here, okay, give me some clear signals, you know. Yeah. John, I wasn't with you that we went once to, I was with you when we went to try a painted horse once out in Illinois somewhere.
Yes, for Molly.
Yes. Yeah, okay, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the horse reacted perfectly with me, and they asked me what did you do, and I said I did nothing. Actually, I just you know, I just kind of communicated to the horse that okay, take it easy. I will take it easy too. You don't like to be in this situation. I don't like it either. So
Yes. Yeah. That was amazing. That was a and really enlightening experience for me. And that was the hook, so to speak. Yes, it was. I remember that very well.
Oh, I loved that horse right away, by the way. I was ready to take it home.
Yeah. Yep, I know you were.
Yeah, I was.
I have a question regarding what if it's obsessive pacifying, obsessive licking, like in terms of when the dog greets another dog and starts obsessively licking they go from the head, you know, greeting the head, yes, and then the tail. But then my dog wants to obsessively lick the other dog's male genitalia or my female dog's genitalia.
Yeah, that's definitely what we would call problem behavior, yes. Yeah, it is. And again, it's very difficult to say, especially without seeing the dog and seeing the context. It's difficult to say where it comes from. But it's not behavior that increases the welfare of the dog in general, or the chances of the dog being successful in a group, socially successful. So that is definitely too much, yes. Everything is a question of balance. That is, if you ask me what nature teaches us, first and foremost, I would say everything is a question of balance. One, I would like to say thank you very much to all of you. First, and foremost to Michael McManus, who has been working very hard to make these things possible, and to John. John is always in the background, but without John, nothing would be possible, because he is the magician making these things happen. Thank you all very much. See you next meeting.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Remember, life is great. Okay?
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Hello, John.
Hello. So here we are again.
Yeah, nobody can see up there. Don't worry. It's good that you got up to close the door, not me, because I have no pants. You do.
I decided to put on pants. I was like, I probably don't need pants, but I'm going to put them on.
Oh my gosh.